The town of Millbrook was the kind of place where winters felt longer than they should and hope seemed to move a little slower. It was here that a man named Ethan Miller lived, a widowed father doing his best to raise his 10-year-old daughter, Lily. Their small apartment sat at the end of a cracked street, its walls faded by time, its furniture a patchwork of years gone by. But to Ethan, it was more than just four walls. It was where love still lived, even in the face of struggle. Ethan worked two jobs. By day, he scrubbed the floors of the local elementary school, the same one Lily attended. The scent of cleaning supplies clung to his clothes, and his hands were rough from years of hard labor. When the bell rang and laughter filled the halls, Ethan quietly swept the corners that joy never reached. He never complained. Every dollar mattered. Every shift meant food on the table. When the sun dipped behind the rooftops, he changed uniforms and headed across town to the storage facility, where he worked nights as a security guard. The hours were long, the pay was small, and the silence of the night sometimes pressed against him like the weight of the world. But whenever he started to feel the exhaustion creeping in, he thought of Lily's smile, and somehow, that was enough to keep going. At home, their routine was simple. Dinner was often whatever they could put together: canned soup, spaghetti, or toast with butter when times were tough. But Ethan never let Lily feel the lack. He'd light a small candle, play an old song on his phone, and make dinner feel like a celebration. One night as they sat at the tiny kitchen table, Lily looked up from her plate and asked, "Daddy, are we poor?" Ethan smiled, the kind of smile that tried to cover pain. He said gently, "We don't have a lot of money, sweetheart, but we're rich in something much more important." Lily tilted her head. "What's that?" Ethan leaned closer, his tired eyes soft with warmth. "Kindness," he said. "We may not have much, but we always have enough to share." That night, after putting Lily to bed, Ethan stood by her doorway, watching her sleep. Her small hand clutched her stuffed bunny, and her breathing was slow and peaceful. He whispered quietly, "Everything I do is for you, kiddo." Then he turned off the light and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pile of unpaid bills. His chest tightened, but he kept his faith. Somehow, things would get better. They had to. Days turned into weeks, and the grind never let up. Ethan was tired, his body aching, but his spirit stayed kind. Even when people ignored him, even when others treated him like he was invisible, he still chose goodness. He believed the world could be better if people just helped each other a little more. Then came that night, the night that changed everything. It was bitterly cold. The kind of cold that cuts through layers of clothing and burns your breath as it leaves your lips. Ethan had just finished mopping the last hallway of the school. His fingers were numb, his back stiff. He clocked out, tucked his small paycheck in his pocket, and began the long walk home. His wallet held only a few crumpled bills, enough for a few days' worth of groceries. He was halfway home when something made him stop. Near the alley behind the grocery store, beside a dumpster, he noticed a shape, a man sitting hunched on the ground, wrapped in a thin piece of cardboard. The man's beard was white and unkempt, his face pale from the cold. His hands shook as he tried to warm them with his breath. For a moment Ethan stood still. He barely had enough for himself and Lily. But then he heard his own words echo back to him, "We always have enough to share." He took a slow breath, walked toward the man, and crouched down beside him. "Hey there, sir," he said softly. "It's freezing out here. You can't stay like this." The old man lifted his head. His voice was weak, raspy from the cold. "I'll be fine," he murmured. "Just needed a place to rest." Ethan could see the man was lying. His lips were trembling, his hands were nearly blue. Without thinking twice, Ethan slipped off his own coat, the only one he owned, and draped it around the man's shoulders. The old man looked at him in disbelief. "You'll catch a cold yourself," he said. Ethan shook his head with a faint smile. "Don't worry about me. I've got a warm home waiting, and someone who needs me there." Then he reached into his pocket, took out the few dollars he had left, and said, "Please, get yourself something warm to eat. There's a diner a few blocks down." The man hesitated, his eyes glistening in the dim light. "Why would you help a stranger like me?" he asked. Ethan smiled again, his voice quiet and sincere. Because someone once helped me when I had nothing. I guess I'm just passing it on. For a long moment, the man said nothing. He just nodded slowly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. Ethan helped him stand, guided him toward a nearby shelter, and made sure he was safe inside before heading home through the biting cold, his breath sharp in the air. That night, Ethan walked into his apartment shivering, but when he saw Lily asleep on the couch, wrapped in a blanket with the TV still glowing softly, warmth spread through him that no coat could ever give. He smiled faintly, whispered, "We did a good thing today," and turned off the light. As he lay in bed, tired but at peace, he had no idea that the man he helped, that cold, quiet stranger behind the store, would soon change everything he'd ever known about luck, kindness, and fate. Because sometimes, life watches the quietest acts and waits for the right moment to return them in ways we can't even imagine. Soon, we shall discover that Ethan's simple act of giving would uncover a hidden fortune, one born not from wealth, but from the purest form of kindness. Morning sunlight filtered through thin curtains, painting soft lines across the worn walls of Ethan's apartment. The smell of instant coffee filled the air as he quietly got ready for another long day. His body ached from the cold night before, but his heart felt lighter. He couldn't stop thinking about the old man, the way his eyes softened when he felt that coat around his shoulders. Ethan wasn't the kind of man who helped people to feel good about himself. He helped because he knew what it meant to need help. Still, as he watched Lily eating her cereal at the table, he felt something different that morning. There was a quiet sense of peace, like maybe his mother's old saying had been right. When you give without expecting, life finds a way to give back. After walking Lily to school, he stopped by the corner store for his usual cheap coffee before heading to his janitor job. The air was still cold, and as he passed the alley behind the grocery store, his eyes instinctively drifted to the spot where he'd found the old man. The cardboard was still there. The paper cup too. But the man was gone. Ethan frowned. Maybe he'd gone to the shelter like he'd suggested. Still, something tugged at him, a small unease that wouldn't let go. He decided to check. After finishing his morning shift, he stopped by the shelter to ask about the man. The young woman at the desk looked up as Ethan approached. She smiled politely. "Can I help you, sir?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, I brought an older gentleman here last night. White hair, long beard, looked like he hadn't eaten in a while. I just wanted to make sure he's okay." The woman checked her list, her fingers moving down the paper. No one matching that description checked in last night. Ethan blinked. "Are you sure? I walked him right up to the door. He said he'd come in." She shook her head. "I'm sorry, sir. Maybe he changed his mind." Ethan thanked her and left, his thoughts turning over and over. Maybe the man had wandered off. Maybe he'd gone somewhere else. But where could he go, dressed like that in this cold? For the rest of the day, the image of that old man haunted Ethan's mind. Every time he mopped a floor, his mind drifted. Every sound of footsteps in the hallway made him look up, half expecting to see that same frail figure again. Later that evening, when he picked up Lily from school, she noticed the worry on his face. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked. Ethan smiled faintly. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about someone I met yesterday." Lily grinned, her eyes bright. "Did you make a new friend?" He chuckled softly. "Something like that." Then he added, more to himself than to her, "I just hope he's somewhere safe tonight." That night, after Lily went to bed, Ethan sat by the window, staring out at the quiet street below. The wind whistled against the glass, carrying the faint sound of cars in the distance. Somewhere out there, a man he barely knew was either safe or freezing again. He thought about going out to look for him but stopped himself. He had work early, and the town was too big to search blindly. Still, a small ache sat in his chest, the kind that comes when you care, even for someone who owes you nothing. Days passed. Life returned to its tiring rhythm. The old man became just another memory, a moment that mattered only to Ethan. Or so he thought. Because one cold Tuesday morning, as snow began to fall softly on the town, something strange happened. When Ethan came home from his night shift, there was an envelope stuck in his doorframe. No return address. Just his name, Ethan Miller, written in neat handwriting. He frowned, turning it over in his hands. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small business card that read, Grayson and Fields Law Office. The letter was typed, but at the bottom, it carried a handwritten message. It read, To the man who shared warmth when the world was cold, I leave what I can no longer enjoy. May your kindness multiply the way kindness once saved me. Ethan's hands trembled as he read the words again and again. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. But his name was right there, printed in ink. His heartbeat quickened. Why would a law office write to him? What did this even mean? And who had sent it? Before he could gather his thoughts, a knock echoed at the door. Ethan opened it to find a man in a suit, holding a folder. The man smiled politely and said, Mr. Ethan Miller? I'm sorry to come unannounced. My name is Daniel Hayes. I'm with Grayson and Fields. I believe you received a letter from us this morning. Ethan nodded slowly, confusion written across his face. Yes, but what is this about? The man adjusted his glasses. Mr. Miller, I represent the estate of the late Walter Grayson. Ethan's heart skipped. Walter? He asked. You mean the old man? Daniel nodded. Yes. He passed away recently. But before his death, he left very specific instructions regarding you. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The old man he'd helped, the one who'd disappeared without a trace, had been someone with a lawyer? Someone who had an estate? Daniel handed him a sealed envelope and a small key attached to a tag with an address. He wanted you to have these, the lawyer said quietly. And his words were clear. Everything starts here. Ethan looked down at the key, the metal cold in his palm. His mind raced. Who was this man really? And what could he have possibly left behind for someone like him? The lawyer gave a polite nod and turned to leave, but before stepping out, he said softly, Mr. Grayson was a complicated man. But he was also a man who never forgot kindness when he saw it. Ethan stood there in stunned silence, the letter still trembling in his hands. The snow continued to fall outside, soft and silent, covering the street like a blank page, one that was about to be filled with a story he never expected to live. Because soon, Ethan would discover that the man he thought was homeless was far from it. And inside that small sealed envelope and that single key lay a secret, one powerful enough to change not just his life, but countless others. The kind of secret that proves sometimes, when you give the little you have, the universe finds a way to give back in ways beyond imagination. The next few days felt like a blur for Ethan. The letter from the law office kept replaying in his mind. The words, the handwriting, the strange feeling that something bigger was unfolding around him. Every time he looked at that sealed envelope and the small brass key, he felt the same mix of disbelief and unease. Who was Walter Grayson? And how could a man who looked so lost, so broken, have had a lawyer, an estate, and now, somehow, a connection to him? Ethan tried to push the thought aside, but curiosity wouldn't let him. After work one evening, he sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of him, his hands resting on either side. Lily sat nearby, coloring, her quiet humming filling the room. He finally whispered under his breath, "What are you trying to tell me, Walter?" The next morning, he decided to visit the law office mentioned on the card. It was a small brick building downtown, tucked between a bakery and an insurance agency, the kind of place people walked by every day without noticing. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and coffee. A receptionist led him to a modest office where Daniel Hayes, the same lawyer who had visited him before, greeted him warmly. Ethan sat down across from the polished wooden desk, still feeling out of place. The lawyer opened a folder filled with papers, his tone calm and deliberate. He explained that Walter Grayson had once been a prominent businessman, the founder of a successful construction company decades ago. But after his wife died and his children turned against him over money, Walter had disappeared from public life. Rumors said he'd gone broke, others said he'd lost his mind. In truth, he had chosen to walk away, to live quietly, far from the greed that had once surrounded him. Daniel looked at Ethan and said, "Before he passed, Mr. Grayson made it clear he didn't want his wealth to go back to his family. He said he wanted it to go to someone who understood what true kindness meant." Ethan was speechless. He shook his head slowly. But I only met him once. I just gave him a coat. I didn't do anything special. The lawyer smiled faintly. Sometimes the smallest act reveals the biggest heart. Then he slid a small, aged envelope across the desk. He left this for you. And this key, it unlocks something he wanted you to see for yourself. Ethan took the envelope in his hands, its edges soft with age. His name was written on it in shaky handwriting, the same handwriting from the first letter. He hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short handwritten note that read, "Ethan, I once believed the world had nothing left to offer. Then one cold night, a stranger gave me warmth without asking who I was. I had nothing to give then, but I leave you something I can no longer enjoy. Not for what you gave me, but for what your kindness reminded me of. That goodness still exists. You'll find the rest in Storage Unit 23, Elmwood Street." Beneath the note was the same brass key. Ethan stared at it, trying to make sense of everything. He looked up at the lawyer. "Is this real?" he asked softly. "Is this some kind of mistake?" Daniel shook his head. "It's as real as the man you helped. Mr. Grayson passed just a few days after you met him. You were the last person he spoke of." The words hit Ethan like a quiet storm. The old man, the one he'd helped behind the store, was gone. He had died. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his throat tightening. He thought of that night, the trembling hands, the weak voice, the way Walter had looked at him like he hadn't been seen in years. He had no idea it was their first and last conversation. He walked out of the law office in silence, the snow crunching under his boots. The world around him seemed slower, quieter. He looked down at the key in his palm, its metal catching the winter light. That night, when he got home, he told Lily part of the story. He didn't mention the money, or the lawyer, or the mystery. Just that the man he helped had passed away. Lily's eyes softened. "That's really sad," she said. "But I'm glad you helped him before he went to heaven." Ethan smiled faintly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, me too." But deep inside, he couldn't stop thinking about that storage unit. What could possibly be inside? A few old clothes? Maybe photos or letters from a life long forgotten. Whatever it was, it felt wrong to leave it unopened. 2 days later, on a gray Saturday morning, Ethan drove to Elmwood Street. The storage facility stood quiet, its rows of metal doors lined like secrets waiting to be told. He parked his old car near Unit 23, stepped out, and stared at the number painted on the door. His breath fogged in the cold air as he inserted the key and turned it slowly. The lock clicked. The door rolled upward with a metallic groan. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The small space was dimly lit by a single overhead bulb. What he saw inside made him freeze in disbelief. There were several old boxes stacked neatly in one corner, a few metal trunks, and a small wooden chest sitting at the center. Beside it lay a folded wool blanket, the same kind the old man had wrapped around himself that night. Ethan stepped closer, his hands trembling. He opened one of the boxes. Inside were bundles of cash, carefully tied with rubber bands. Another box held stacks of handwritten journals, their pages filled with notes, sketches, and thoughts. And inside the chest lay something else, a sealed envelope with a deed attached. The paper read, "Property of Walter Grayson, Countryside Estate, estimated value, $3.4 million. Ethan dropped to his knees, unable to breathe for a moment. This couldn't be real. It just couldn't. The man he'd given a coat to had left him a fortune. But as he looked around the small unit, at the simple things Walter had chosen to leave behind, it became clear, this wasn't about money. It was about meaning. Every journal was filled with reflections on life, regret, and the search for something money could never buy, genuine kindness. Tears filled Ethan's eyes as he sat on the cold concrete floor, the key still in his hand. He realized then that Walter hadn't just left him wealth, he'd left him a message. A message that true riches aren't in what we keep, but in what we give away. And soon, the choice Ethan would make with this new fortune would prove that lesson in the most powerful way possible. Because the real treasure wasn't what Walter left behind, it was what Ethan would do with it next. Weeks passed, and the shock of that discovery slowly settled into something deeper, a sense of purpose. The money, the notebooks, the property deed, they weren't just gifts. They were entrusted to him. Ethan knew it in his bones. He spent several quiet nights rereading Walter's words. Every page carried a message, not about wealth, but about redemption. Walter had lived surrounded by riches yet starved for humanity. And in Ethan's small gesture of kindness, he had found what money could never buy. One crisp morning, Ethan stood at the edge of the countryside property listed on the deed, the Grayson Estate at Willow Creek. The grass was overgrown. The once grand house stood tired but still proud against the rising sun. Its white paint had peeled, vines curled around its railings, and shattered windows told of years without laughter or light. Ethan walked up the porch steps slowly, his boots creaking against the old wood. He turned the doorknob and stepped inside. Dust floated in beams of sunlight. Faded portraits hung on the walls, silent witnesses to a life long gone. Yet despite the decay, there was something peaceful here, as though the house itself had been waiting to breathe again. He whispered softly, "We'll bring you back to life, Walter." Over the next few months, Ethan poured his energy, heart, and sweat into restoring the estate, not as a mansion for himself, but as a sanctuary for others. He repaired what he could, sold a few of the cash bundles to buy building materials, and hired a few local workers who were down on their luck. Every nail hammered, every wall painted carried meaning. It wasn't charity, it was community being reborn. Word began to spread around the small town about the janitor who suddenly bought a huge, broken-down house and was turning it into something new. People whispered. Some were skeptical. Others were curious. But when they saw what Ethan was doing, doubt turned to admiration. Within months, the doors of the newly restored Grayson Community Center opened for the first time. The sign out front, painted by local kids, read, "A place to rest, rebuild, and rise." Inside, there was a free meal area for those in need, classrooms for after-school tutoring, and a small office that helped struggling parents find jobs. There was even a cozy reading corner filled with donated books, something Lily had personally insisted on. One evening, after the opening ceremony, Ethan sat quietly on a bench outside the center. He watched as children played in the yard, parents laughed over shared coffee, and volunteers chatted happily while cleaning up. Lily ran up and wrapped her arms around him. Her smile was radiant. "Dad, everyone loves it. They said they've never had anything like this before." Ethan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "That's because it's not mine, sweetheart. It's theirs. It's for everyone who just needs a little bit of kindness to start again." She looked up at him proudly. "Mom would be so happy right now." His voice trembled as he replied, "Yeah, she would. And I think Walter would too." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Ethan sat at the kitchen table again, the same spot where years ago he'd worried about overdue bills and half-empty plates. Now, in front of him lay the final notebook from Walter's collection. He flipped it open to a blank page and began to write, not for himself, but for the man who'd believed in him without even knowing him. "Walter, you once said true wealth isn't in what we keep, but what we give. I understand that now. You gave me more than money, you gave me meaning. And I'll spend the rest of my life passing that forward." As he closed the notebook, a tear slid down his cheek. But it wasn't from sadness, it was from gratitude. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel poor. He felt rich beyond measure. From that day on, Ethan continued to grow the center. He partnered with local schools to create scholarships for single parents. He set up programs for job training, mental health support, and food drives. The town that once barely noticed him now looked up to him. But Ethan never changed. He still lived simply, still wore the same boots, and still walked to work every morning, now as the director of something far greater than himself. And every Sunday, he would take Lily to a quiet corner of the community garden behind the center. There, under a maple tree, sat a small stone plaque that read, "In memory of Walter Grayson, a fortune found through kindness." Lily once asked, "Dad, do you ever miss having more for just us?" Ethan smiled softly and shook his head. "We already have more than enough, honey. Because kindness doesn't divide, it multiplies." She leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice gentle. "You turned kindness into a home for everyone." He wrapped his arm around her, holding her close as the sun dipped behind the trees. The laughter of children echoed in the distance, blending with the rustling leaves, a symphony of life reborn. But deep down, Ethan knew his journey wasn't over yet. Because soon he would leave behind something even greater than a center, a legacy that would outlive them both, written not in money or marble, but in the hearts he'd helped heal. Years passed, and what began as a humble act of kindness had blossomed into something far greater than Ethan Miller could have ever dreamed. The Grayson Community Center had become the beating heart of the small town, a place where broken families found support, struggling parents rediscovered hope, and children built dreams that once seemed unreachable. Every corner of the center told a story. The mural painted on the main wall showed people helping one another, hands of every color and size intertwined beneath the words, "Kindness is the wealth we all can afford." In the evenings, the classrooms filled with laughter from tutoring sessions, music lessons, and young volunteers who looked up to Ethan as a mentor. Ethan never sought recognition, but word of what he had done spread quietly across neighboring towns. People came from miles away to see how one man's compassion could rebuild an entire community. Local reporters wrote articles calling him the janitor who built hope. Churches and schools quoted his story. Yet, despite all the attention, Ethan remained the same, humble, soft-spoken, always the first to arrive and the last to leave. He still lived in that same small apartment with Lily, though it looked a little brighter now. The walls carried pictures of smiling families, community events, and a framed copy of the first dollar ever donated to the center. It wasn't luxury, but it was home. One evening, after another long day at the center, Ethan sat at his desk, pen in hand, writing a letter. The paper trembled slightly beneath his fingers, not from weakness, but from emotion. Lily, now older and on her way to college, would find this letter someday, when the time was right. He wrote slowly, carefully choosing each word. "My dearest Lily, if you're reading this, it means you're ready to understand what I've always tried to teach you, that true wealth isn't in what you keep. It's in what you give. Years ago, I met a man who reminded me that kindness doesn't ask for return. It simply gives. That day, I gave my coat and my last few dollars to a stranger. I didn't know it then, but I was giving more than comfort. I was planting a seed that would grow into everything we have today. Never measure life by what you earn or own, but by the lives you touch. You'll find that the greatest riches are found in giving others a reason to believe again. Remember, sweetheart, kindness has a way of coming back richer than you can imagine. Love always, Dad." He set the letter aside and exhaled deeply. The night air drifted through the open window, carrying the faint sound of laughter from the community center across the street. He smiled, content. The next morning, Ethan walked to the same corner where he had first met Walter Grayson years ago. The old dumpster was gone, replaced by a clean sidewalk and a small memorial bench surrounded by flowers. He sat down, running his hand gently over the engraved plaque that read, "In memory of Walter Grayson, a fortune found through kindness." Ethan smiled softly. "You were right, old man," he whispered. "We really can't take it with us. But we can leave it behind in better hands." He sat there for a while, watching the world move, people passing by, cars rolling down the street, kids laughing as they ran toward the park nearby. Everything looked ordinary, yet to Ethan, it all felt extraordinary. Because he knew how easily one small choice could change everything. That night, back at the center, the lights shone warmly through the windows. Inside, families gathered for the weekly community dinner. Laughter and conversation filled the room. Ethan stood near the doorway, his hands in his pockets, just watching. A woman approached him, one of the single mothers he'd helped find a job months ago. Tears filled her eyes as she said, "Mr. Miller, I just wanted to thank you. Because of you, my son is going to college next fall. You don't know how much that means to us." Ethan smiled gently. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank Walter. He's the one who taught me what to do with a blessing." The woman looked puzzled for a moment, then smiled. "Then thank you both." As she walked away, Ethan felt something stir inside, not pride, but peace. The kind that comes when you know your purpose has been fulfilled. Later that night, as the center grew quiet, Ethan stepped outside one last time. The stars shimmered above the roof of the building, and the cool breeze brushed against his face. He looked up and whispered, "We did it, Claire, and we did it, Walter. We turned kindness into something that will never die." In that moment, everything came full circle. A poor man's act of kindness had not only uncovered a hidden fortune, it had uncovered the true fortune buried deep in the human heart. Because in the end, wealth fades, fame disappears, and even time moves on, but kindness endures forever. And as the night sky glowed above the town, it seemed almost as if somewhere, perhaps in a gentler place, Walter Grayson was smiling too. Sometimes, the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and sometimes, it can change the world. Ethan never expected anything in return, yet his selfless heart uncovered a fortune that money could never buy. If this story touched your heart, remember, kindness costs nothing, but its value is beyond measure. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story so more people remember that goodness still exists. And tell us in the comments, what's one act of kindness you'll give someone today? And remember, we're not just telling stories. We're changing lives.